There's something unsettling about a winter night, when the world is quiet enough that you can hear the snow settling on the landscape, and every sound seems to carry just a little too clearly across the wind. Then there's a knock at the door. It's dark and late in the evening, and as you approach your front door and slowly open it, you're startled to hear the sound of voices coming from just beyond the threshold. But that uneasy feeling soon subsides as the voices begin to move in harmony, as they start to serenade you with the sound of a Christmas carol. Relaxed, you call your family from the parlor to listen in on the sound of the choir. It's beautiful and harmless, a picture-perfect Christmas scene, until the singing stops. Welcome back, spooky souls, to a brand new episode of Let's Talk Spooky. As always, I'm your host, Shauna, and I'm excited for today's episode because I feel like it opens the door between the creepy side of Christmas and the part that gives us nostalgia. But before we get into tonight's episode, I want to give a shout out to all of my new followers, all of the new listeners that have joined the podcast in the last few months. I am just so blessed and so excited to have you all join me and follow along on this storytelling journey. I love being able to talk spooky with people, and I love hearing your feedback, so keep doing that. If you're just finding this podcast and it's your first time listening, welcome. And if you are already a current listener, also welcome back. I do want to make a quick request. If you are listening and you haven't yet hit the subscribe button, please do that. It helps our channel, it helps promote it, and it helps others find us. So if you could take a moment to hit that subscribe button, leave a review, comment, say hi. I love to hear from you guys. All right, let's get into tonight's episode. Most of us think that carolers are charming, innocent, festive, but old traditions weren't so warm and fuzzy. In fact, winter visitors at your door once carried equal parts joy and equal parts threat. And some of the stories and legends and real life cases tell us that midnight carolers might be the last sound that you ever hear. So tonight, we're stepping into the snow-covered world of killer carolers and the chilling blend of history, folklore, and the strange true tales of when carolers came a-callin'. So, light a candle, dim those lights, and let's talk spooky. Before Christmas caroling became the soft candlelight tradition we picture today, neighbors in wool scarves, smiling choirs, polite harmonies at your doorstep, it was something far wilder, noisier, and even a little dangerous. Caroling as we know it grew out of something much older, a winter ritual that dates far enough back that it blends the line between a festive visit and a household threat. For medieval families, the long nights of winter were already unsettling. Food was scarce, illness was common, and roads were nearly impassable. The quiet of midwinter gave everyone a little too much time to think. This was the season when the dead were believed to walk, and spirits roamed freely, and when strangers at your door were just as likely to bring trouble as cheer. And right in the middle of all that came the wassailers. These weren't sweet, coordinated caroling groups that you might imagine. Wassailers were loud, rowdy bands, usually consisting of young men, traveling house to house, demanding food, ale, and coin. Their songs weren't requested, they were warnings, wrapped in melody. Give us something, or else. Records from the 14th and 15th century describe wassailers who threatened to salute homes with loud insults if refused, by pelting doors with rotten fruit, intentionally damaging fences, barns, or windows, or simply forcing their way inside to continue the party. Many wassailers darkened their faces with soot and ash. Others pulled animal skins over their shoulders or wore crude masks made of leather and straw. In the light of the candles, these groups must have looked like something out of the movie The Strangers. Families would open the door, not because they wanted to, but because they really had no choice. Turning these men away was a dangerous choice. As these traditions evolved, though, another group emerged, the mummers. The mummers especially targeted England, Ireland, and parts of Northern Europe. They performed short, chaotic plays that involved death and resurrection themes. They didn't wait to be invited in either. They simply pushed past the threshold of the house, performed inside your home, drank your ale, ate your bread, and finally took something with them as a gift before eventually leaving the occupants alone. There are actually 17th century court cases that involve mummers robbing a household while disguised in their costumes. Groups would use the play as a sort of distraction, while others in the group would steal livestock, assault occupants, and take any essentials they deemed fit. These festive visits, or break-ins, were disguised as caroling rounds. And it's kind of where the word Christmas carolers came into play. Even the definition of caroling back then didn't necessarily mean singing of Christmas songs. It meant a ringing dance, a noisy circle of homes, a chaotic performance intended to break the stillness of winter or shake loose the good fortune of the new year. So when you imagine a group of masked figures approaching your home at night, singing, shouting, and demanding, well, it might feel like something out of a horror movie, but it wasn't a movie setup. It was very much a reality. And in the season when the boundaries between the living and the dead were believed to be thin, you didn't always know what was waiting for you on the other side of your door. So it's no surprise that when the Victorian era embraced Christmas ghost stories, these older unruly customs seemed to kind of transform from break-ins to a more spectral energy. But they still became way, way more chilling. By the time we enter the Victorian era, the rowdy, chaotic world of wassailers and mummers have begun to fade, replaced by something quieter, more polished, what we now recognize as the beginnings of Christmas caroling. But the Victorians, with their depth of love of the supernatural, didn't let tradition soften entirely. Instead, they reshaped it to meet their own, weaving ghost stories and winter superstitions through the cracks of newly refined customs. What emerged was a chilling blend of cheer, dread, and the idea that a song in a snowstorm might not be sung by the living. Victorian Christmas was steeped in ghosts. Families gathered around a fire, not just for warmth, but for storytelling. And we covered a bit of this in our last episode about a haunted Victorian Christmas. So if you haven't checked that out yet, go take a look because it's a good one. But tales of restless spirits, haunted roads, and spectral visitations were part of everyday Victorian Christmas. Newspapers published supernatural accounts throughout December. Magazines dedicated entire issues to Yuletide hauntings. And it was said that the veil was the thinnest during the end of the winter time. Quiet, frozen, and still became the perfect backdrop for all things unseen. Caroling slipped naturally into place here. After all, what is more unnerving than a knock at your door after dark, followed by the sound of voices that you don't necessarily recognize? One of the most widespread Victorian legends tells of a family hearing carols outside late in night, perfect harmonies drifting over the snow. But when they open the door, they find that no one was there. These phantom choirs were treated as omens. Sometimes they were signaled as death was coming. Other times they were resolved as spirits seeking acknowledgement. The eeriest versions, though, described footprints leading up to the doorstep, but none of them leading away. And sometimes there were no footprints at all. Even real carolers who took an uncanny quality in Victorian winters were slightly unforgiving as well. They would bundle themselves up tightly, obviously to survive the very cold and harsh temperatures. Scarves would cover their faces, shawls wrapped around their noses, hats pulled over, so essentially all you could see was their eyes. In the light of a lantern, a group of carolers may look almost faceless, an eerie essence that you didn't know exactly who was standing on the other side of your door. But strangely enough, their voices captivated you enough to stand and listen. And then there was the old story that circulated around the mid-1800s of a family sitting by the fire hearing "O Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen" sung outside exactly at midnight. The singing was almost flawless, and when the father stepped outside to offer a coin, he only saw a lone figure quietly walking through the drifts of snow. There was no one else, no lantern, and where the singer had stood in his previous steps, there was no footprints left behind. Throughout rural Britain, remnants of older customs did linger. Masked mummers blended their performances with caroling, singers donning animal masks and veils, and strange visitors who would silently arrive at doors late at night. But to Victorian families who were already inclined to superstition, these encounters blurred the lines between the known and the unknown just enough to be welcomed into the society. Caroling once showed a misrule or revelry had transformed into something almost ambiguous and ritualistic, traditional glory, if you will. Half community ritual and half ghost story. A knock at the door could bring warmth and celebration, or a chilling message from the winter wind. And as the era pressed on, these eerie tales didn't fade. They adapted, they reshaped, and they became urban legends that we tell in today's stories, where visitors in the night are not spirits at all, but something far more human. And I don't know about you, but I'm not sure which is scarier. The Victorians may have wrapped their fear in ghost stories, imagining phantom choirs at the doorstep, dusted with impossible footprints. But as time moved forward, something more unsettling began to creep into tradition. Not spirits, not omens, just regular people. Because the truth is, the moment a stranger appears at our door in the night of winter, singing a song that you didn't ask for, the supernatural stops, and it begins to get a little more real. By the time the 20th century, caroling had settled into the wholesome ritual that we so recognize today, full of choirs and fundraisers, maybe school groups huddled together in little matching hats. But under the surface of that, a different kind of story began to spread, one rooted not in folklore, but in fear of human intention. The most famous of these legends is the case of the silent carolers. And it goes like this. A family hearing singing outside, soft, hesitant, like the first verse of a familiar carol. But when they opened the door, the group standing on the porch's faces were hidden behind scarves and wool hats. They did finish their song politely, but then they pushed their way inside. In some versions, the family was robbed, and in darker versions, they were murdered. All versions, though, however, the carolers' faces were never seen, and this story circled wildly around the 1950s and 60s, so widely that police departments in several states had to issue reminders not to open your door late at night to carolers, because you never knew what their intentions might be. It was, in fact, an urban legend for sure, but it was one rooted in very real anxiety, that someone could hide malice behind a very comforting tradition. But, unfortunately, not all the stories were invented ones. And throughout the second half of the 20th century, multiple burglars rang through the United States and the UK and Canada, and they used caroling to cover up their malice intent. They would knock first, and then start singing. They would draw people to the door, and homeowners' attentions would be fixed on the performers, while accomplices, they would circle round back. They would go through windows and sliding doors, and they weren't supernatural events or phantom choirs. They were just people, exploiting an opportunity that the season brought. And these strangers, they disguised themselves as carolers to create comfort. Detailed police reports say that some even dressed as the classic Santa, asking for donations to charities, churches, singing at homes, and even asking for entrance to the house to pray for the individuals inside. One chilling account in the 1970s described a man blended into a real community choir. Witnesses swore that he wasn't part of the group, but they didn't really recognize him, so they didn't think too much about it. He seemed to march along with them and sing the song softly, but he slipped away once a house en route had opened their door. And then hours later, the house was robbed, which, just a side note, he must have snuck in and hid there, which I don't know about you, but the idea of somebody hiding in my house and waiting for an opportunity is probably one of the most terrifying thoughts. But all right, back to the stories. Another case involved a pair of criminals who dressed in full Victorian caroling costumes, knocked on the doors, and their outfits were so elaborate, so theatrical, and so charming that they were actually invited inside the home for a warm drink. While there, they tied the homeowners up, stole jewelry, silverware, coats, anything that they could put in their pockets or carry. What these modern stories have in common is simple, that the fear doesn't always have to come from the supernatural. It comes from the idea that danger can dress itself up in something relaxing and familiar, and the song meant to bring cheer in a season of joy can actually be far more predatorial. Urban legends took that truth and amplified it. Whispering campaigns spread through suburbs. Don't open your door if the carolers wear scarves up too high. Don't invite someone in unless you recognize them. And don't trust anybody who's singing the song wrong. Because the line between a tradition and a tactic is very thin. And the moment a stranger stands outside your home at night, waiting, watching, singing softly, you realize how vulnerable that door really is. And perhaps that's why, even now, we still shiver a little bit when an unexpected knock echoes through the winter evening. And speaking of knocking in the night, let's step into the dark for a moment. Because stories and reports are one thing, but nothing brings this fear to life quite like hearing a tale of someone who opened their door when they shouldn't have. And it happened in a little town tucked between the frozen fields and a lonely stretch of highway where winter arrived early, stayed longer, and the kind of place that gas stations, diners closed around 6, mailboxes were half buried in snowdrifts, and people minded their own business. They liked the quiet, and they depended on it. Marilyn had lived at the edge of town her entire life. A 52-year-old widow was content with her routines. She managed the general store during the day and went home to her small farmhouse at night. It was a simple life, no surprises, no nonsense, nothing ever out of the ordinary, which is just how she preferred it. Until December 14th. That night, the snow fell thick, steady as a curtain, muffling the world around her. The kind of snowfall that makes you feel a little far away from the real world. Marilyn locked up her shop, brushed the snow off her truck, and began the short drive home. The radio sputtered between the static, Christmas songs on and off, and her headlights curved the narrow tunneled roads ahead. When she pulled into her driveway, she noticed something strange. Her porch light was on, and she hadn't left it on. But she brushed it off as maybe she'd simply forgotten. She stepped inside the house, and a prickle ran down her back. The house felt colder than it should have, so she turned up the heat and made herself a cup of tea and settled into her favorite chair by the window, watching the snow steadily fall around her. That's when she heard it. A knock. Sharp and single. Like someone tested the wood. She froze. It was almost 10 o'clock at night and she lived in the middle of nowhere. No one ever came by this late. Another knock. And then a soft hum. At first she thought it was the wind, but the sound seemed to gather tune. Almost a carol. One she recognized but couldn't quite place. It was slow and slightly off-key, and drawn out in a way that made her stomach twist. Rising from her chair, she peeked through the curtains, and there were 4 figures standing on her porch. And she didn't move. Not even when the wind whipped around their scarves. Their faces were buried beneath layers of clothes and wool, and it made them almost seem faceless, like a silhouette cut out of the night. They stood shoulder to shoulder and just waited there. Then, in perfect unison, they began to sing. Marilyn's breath caught in her chest. The voices weren't warm or bright or even human. They seemed to almost blend together in a strange, metallic-like harmony. Like someone mimicking the sound of caroling that really didn't truly know how to sing. She didn't go to the door. She didn't call out. She really didn't move from where she was standing. And the song reached its end, and the figures remained standing there, just staring at her door. Then came the third knock, this time harder and more deliberate. She stepped back from the window, and she could feel them now. She could feel that they knew she was there, and every instinct in her body told her not to open that door. And then as the whole world held its breath, the singing stopped. A beat of silence, and then from the back of the house, another knock. Marilyn spun around so fast she nearly fell, her heart hammering into her throat. The back door was locked. She knew it was. She checked it twice. And yet, knock, knock, knock. 3 measured taps, the exact same rhythm as the front door. She backed away into the hallway and grabbed her phone from the table. No signal. Of course. No dial tone, just dead air. The house settled into a thick, suffocating quiet. And then the singing began again. But this time it wasn't on the porch. It wasn't even outside. It seemed like it was coming from inside the house. Faint at first, drifting through the vents, almost as if the house itself was singing. Then it came louder and clearer, a verse she remembered from her childhood. Oh, bring us some figgy pudding. Her breath hitched. The floor heater creaked, and suddenly the metal grate across the room rattled violently, as if something beneath it was trying to push through. With a shriek of metal, the corner of the vent lifted, and a pale hand, long, narrow fingers, chalk-like twigs, seemed to slip out from the opening. Marilyn stumbled back, crashing into the hallway wall. She ran to the front door, fumbling with the lock, shaking hands. As she turned the deadbolt, she heard a footstep behind her, soft, bare, and slow, and a voice right against her ear. And it whispered the last line of the carol. We won't go until we get some. The door flew open and the cold wind blasted through the room. For a moment she thought she could escape, but the singing outside grew louder, fuller, like an entire night had joined in. Her porch light flickered and the four shapes filled the threshold, and somewhere behind her another figure stepped through the shadows. No one in town had ever seen Marilyn again, but on winter nights, when the snow falls just right and the wind carries a sound in a strange direction, drivers swear they can still hear the drift from the empty farmhouse, as four voices sing in harmony, with a fifth faintly joining in. They say if you hear it, don't stop, never look, and never open your door. So before we end tonight's episode, I want to tell you one more urban legend. And this one hopefully will solidify why you should never open your door on the holiday season to strangers, even the ones that are singing. They still talk about what happened on Wren Street, though the house itself is empty now, and the windows are boarded and the yard is overgrown, and Christmas lights can still be faintly seen under a layer of frost and dust. But this isn't about the house now. This is about what happened on Christmas Eve in the late 80s. An elderly couple named Ruth and Daniel lived in the very last house on Wren Street, a little blue bungalow with a sagging porch and a single cedar wreath that hung on the door. They were quiet people. They had no kids, no parties, no visitors, except for the odd neighbor who would drop off Christmas cookies. That year, a snowstorm came. It was white and suffocating, the kind of storm where sound doesn't travel, and by evening the whole street looked abandoned. Cars were buried up to their mirrors, and window lights flickered behind closed curtains. That's when the singing started. Soft at first, far too soft to be a group of carolers. But they must have been out walking in the weather. Why else would they hear music? Ruth thought it might be the radio and maybe a faint bleeding of static. But when she turned it off, the sound was much more clear. And it was a single voice now, low and measured, singing "O Come All Ye Faithful," into slow dragging rhythm that made her skin prickle. Daniel went to the window and squinted through the frost. At the edge of the sidewalk stood a single figure, wearing old-fashioned wool coat and a hat pulled low. The snow fell heavy around them, but they didn't move, not even shifting their weight in the growing layers of snow. Not even a breath that Ruth could see fogging the air. They just sang. Strange, Daniel thought, and he opened the door a crack to tell them to get off, go home. That the roads were closed and the storm was way too dangerous. But the moment the door opened, the figure's voice stopped. And so did the snow. Not for long, just for a second, like the whole world had just paused. The figure tilted his head, not towards Daniel, towards the door, as if listening to the house itself. and then whispering something, not lyrics, not a greeting, just a soft, rasping hiss that made Ruth's stomach lurch. But she couldn't understand the words. She knew they were unkind. Something sinister. Then the figure moved and stepped forward. Daniel slammed the door quickly and locked it. They checked the locks throughout the whole house, turned out the lights, backed away from the window, and in a few minutes everything seemed silent again. The snow once again began to fall around the house. The heater hummed, and Ruth tried to convince herself that it must have been some kind of prank. Some bored teenager put on a costume and thought it would be fun. But then the singing started again. But this time it was coming from the side of the house, and then the back of the house, and then the attic. It was the same dragging melody, repeated over and over and over, as if circling the house for slow, widening loops. On the final repetition, the voice cracked into something higher, something off-key and almost strained, like a laughter, and then it stopped. When the storm cleared the next morning, neighbors noticed that the blue bungalow's door was standing wide open. Snow drifted across the living room floorboards. No footsteps led in or out, no sign of forced entry, just a cedar wreath laying face down in the entrance of the house, its ribbon torn clean off. Ruth and Daniel were never found. The house has been empty ever since, and every December, people can swear that if you stand at the end of Wren Street after dark, just long enough for the wind to settle, that you might be able to hear it. That thin, dragging voice hummed first a few notes, "Come all ye faithful," and then the singing will stop, and that's when you should leave. In fact, you should run, because that means the figure isn't far behind. It's listening at the door, and it's waiting. And that, my friends, is where we will leave tonight. A storm-swept house on Wren Street, whispers in the snow, and a reminder that not every song is a welcoming one. If you enjoyed tonight's dive into the eerie history and strange legends of caroling and the chilling stories behind them, please take a moment to follow Let's Talk Spooky wherever you listen to your podcasts. It truly does help our little community grow, and it tells the algorithm that the spooky season is not just for October. Also, you can find us over on Instagram at Let's Talk Spooky Pod and on TikTok at Let's Talk Spooky. And if you do, come say hi and share your favorite creepy caroling story. I want to know more about your Christmas stuff and the spooky things you may have heard or seen. And if you ever hear an unsettling knock at your door or some song where it should not be, well, maybe tell me. I want to hear about it. Or maybe just don't answer the door, because I worry for you guys sometimes and your creepy curiosities. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for supporting our show. And thank you for keeping the spirit of storytelling alive. Until next time, stay curious, stay warm, and stay spooky. This episode was written and produced by me, Shauna, and the team here at Let's Talk Spooky. If you have a spooky story that you want to share with us, check us out on our socials on Instagram at Let's Talk Spooky Pod and on TikTok at Let's Talk Spooky. You can also email us at letstalkspookypodcast@gmail.com. As well as all source material can be found in the description box below.